On Halloween night, a black woman walked aimlessly back to her small diner, which was about to close down under the weight of crushing debt. Suddenly, a trembling voice cut, "Grandpa, I'm so hungry. Are we going to die?" She saw a little girl, no more than 8, shivered in a torn dress beside a frail old man. Moved by compassion, the woman approached and invited them inside. The old man hesitated, but when he saw his granddaughter clutching her empty stomach, he accepted. After that night, they would never have known that their lives would change forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The neon sign of Harper's Kitchen flickered against the October darkness, casting uneven shadows on the empty street below. Outside, jack-o'-lanterns sat on stoops, their carved faces grinning in the cold autumn air. Inside, Diana Harper sat hunched over a mountain of unpaid bills, rent, utilities, suppliers who had stopped calling because they knew she had nothing left. "I've let you down, Mama," she whispered to the empty restaurant. "I've let this place die." The silence pressed down around her, broken only by the wheeze of an ancient refrigerator. Across the street, Dominic's bistro glowed with warm light and laughter spilling through its polished windows, a cruel reminder of everything Harper's Kitchen used to be. Outside, the last trick-or-treaters drifted home, their bright costumes swallowed by the Halloween dark. Fast food chains had slowly strangled her business until Harper's Kitchen stood like a monument to a dying way of life. Diana locked up, turned off the last light, and stepped into the cold. For a while, she just walked. Not home, not anywhere in particular, just far enough that the silence of Harper's Kitchen couldn't reach her. The night air bit at her cheeks, sharp and clean. She passed 2 shuttered shops and an empty bus stop before turning down Maple Avenue. At the corner of Maple Avenue, 2 figures huddled against a brick wall beneath a threadbare blanket decorated with faded Halloween pumpkins, clearly scavenged from someone's trash. An elderly man held a small girl close, his arms wrapped around her as if trying to keep the world away. The girl wore a torn princess costume, probably found in a donation bin, her eyes dull with exhaustion and hunger. Diana slowed, recognizing something in their fragile stillness, the shape of people who had nowhere left to go. The girl stirred, her voice barely more than a whisper carried by the wind. "Grandpa, my hands don't feel anything anymore. Are we going to die?" She paused, her breath trembling. I just wanted some candy tonight." The words rooted Diana to the spot. It was Halloween. A night when children should be home counting their candy, not sitting on a sidewalk with empty hands and empty stomachs. She stood staring at them, 2 forgotten souls clinging to each other as though love was the only thing left keeping them alive. Something inside her cracked. She had felt her own despair gnawing at her for months, but this was worse. She still had walls, a roof, 4 burners that still worked. These 2 had nothing. A memory rose, quiet and unbidden, her mother standing by the stove on another cold night, long ago, draping her old cardigan around a neighbor's shoulders. "No one should be cold if you can help it," she'd said simply. Diana hadn't thought of that moment in years, until now. She stepped closer, her boots crunching against fallen leaves, and spoke in a voice as gentle as she could manage. "You don't have to be out here tonight," she said gently, nodding toward the dim sign a few doors down. "That's my place, Harper's Kitchen. It's closed now, but the stove still works. Both of you can come in and warm up, and I think I have some candy left from tonight." The man's arms tightened around the girl, his chin lifting in defiance, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "We don't need charity," he murmured, his voice clear and proud. Diana exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cold October air. She wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't charity, it was just human decency. But before she could, the girl stirred again, her wide eyes flicking between her grandfather and Diana. And this time, her small voice carried a plea she couldn't hide. "Please, Grandpa, I'm so cold, and it's Halloween. Everyone else got treats tonight." The man's shoulders sagged, his resolve crumbling under the weight of that fragile voice. He gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Diana extended her arm, and led them across the street, past a carved pumpkin on her doorstep, whose candle had burned out hours ago. When she unlocked the door and pushed it open, the warmth of the restaurant spilled out, a thin refuge against the autumn night's bite. She guided them to a booth near the heater, then slipped into the kitchen. Her hands moved without thought, chopping, stirring, heating broth, the rhythm of survival she knew too well. While the soup heated, she found a plastic pumpkin bucket she'd filled with candy for trick-or-treaters and brought it to the girl. "Happy Halloween, sweetheart. Pick whatever you want." The girl's eyes went wide with wonder, as though Diana had offered her treasure. With trembling hands, she selected 3 pieces of candy, handling them like precious jewels. "You can take more," Diana said gently. "Take as much as you want." The girl looked at her grandfather, who nodded, tears in his eyes. She took 5 more pieces, carefully placing them in the pocket of her tattered costume. As the scent of simmering broth filled the small restaurant, the old man sat stiffly, his hands folded on the table. The girl leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. "She's my granddaughter," the old man said quietly, as if afraid the silence might swallow him. "Emma," he hesitated, then added almost as an afterthought, "and I'm Walter." Diana turned, surprised by the softness in his tone. "I'm Diana," she said gently. "Diana Harper, a good name," Walter said with a faint nod, as if tasting the weight of it. "We've been moving around a bit," he added after a pause. "It's been hard finding steady work." He said nothing more, and Diana didn't press. She could see enough, the exhaustion, the worn clothes, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of nights spent without shelter. When she carried out the soup, she placed it gently before them as if setting down an offering. The girl's eyes lit up, her hands wrapping clumsily around the spoon, slurping greedily while the man hesitated, then finally took a cautious sip. He closed his eyes, exhaling softly, and whispered, "You still simmer it instead of boil it," he murmured without thinking, then seemed to regret saying it. "It's really good," he added quickly. Diana blinked, surprised by the precision of the comment, but said nothing. The man looked away, his eyes distant, as though remembering another kitchen, long ago. Diana leaned against the counter, her chest easing for the first time that night, as she watched them eat. But when the bowls were empty and silence returned, she knew the truth. Sending them back into the snow would be like sending them to their deaths. She cleared her throat, gesturing toward the back hallway. "There's a storage room behind the kitchen," she said quietly. "There's a couch, some blankets, not much, but it's warmer than the street. Stay here tonight." The man looked up sharply, his eyes shining with unshed tears, his mouth opening as though to refuse. But the girl tugged his sleeve, eyes pleading. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you." Diana turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen lamp. As she climbed the narrow stairs to the small apartment above the restaurant, exhaustion pressed down on her, but it was a different kind than before. Not the hollow ache of failure, but the heavy warmth of having done something that mattered. Her apartment was modest, a single bed, a desk, and a window that overlooked the quiet street below. She changed into her worn nightgown, and stood for a moment at the window, looking down at the flickering neon sign of Harper's Kitchen. Through the glass, she could see a faint light still burning in the dining room. She imagined the old man and the girl settling under blankets, the little one finally warm, her breathing evening out as sleep claimed her. Diana smiled to herself, a tired, genuine smile she hadn't felt in months. She whispered into the stillness, "Sleep well, little one." For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. The worry about bills, about tomorrow, about the future, all of it was still there, waiting. But tonight, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of breath, of warmth, of fragile hope. She turned off the lamp, and lay down, letting the faint hum of the heater and the quiet rhythm of the city lull her to sleep. The morning light crept through the windows of Harper's Kitchen, falling across the tables still decorated with paper bats and orange streamers from yesterday's half-hearted Halloween decorations. Outside, the street was littered with candy wrappers and smashed pumpkins, the aftermath of the night's celebrations. Inside, something was different. When Diana unlocked the door and stepped in, expecting the same dim, cluttered room she had left the night before, she froze. The place was spotless, every chair was tucked neatly beneath the tables. The Halloween decorations had been carefully straightened. The windows, once cloudy with smudges, gleamed in the weak morning sunlight. Even the counter, where bills had piled up like a curse, stood clear, the papers stacked in neat piles. The floor looked as though someone had scrubbed every inch. Diana stood at the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. This was not how she had left it. She set her keys down slowly, her calloused fingers brushing against the counter, and listened. From the back room came the rustle of fabric and the faint voice of a child, singing a Halloween song. She walked toward the storage room, her boots sounding heavy against the clean floor. When she pushed the door open, she saw them. The old man was on his knees folding rags with steady hands. Beside him, the girl sat on a stool still wearing the princess costume from last night, her small legs swinging, her head bent over a scrap of paper. She was using an orange crayon, probably from a kid's menu. The girl looked up the moment she saw Diana, her face lit up with joy. "Look," she cried, holding the paper out with both hands. "We cleaned everything. Grandpa said we shouldn't leave a mess after someone helps us. And I made you a picture. It's a pumpkin. See, that's you, and that's Grandpa, and that's me. We're all in the restaurant, and everyone's happy." The old man rose slowly, brushing dust from his pants. His eyes met Diana's with a steadiness that carried both pride and apology. "We were going to leave before you opened," he said quietly. "Didn't want to trouble you any longer." Diana glanced around again at the gleaming tables, the sunlight spilling across the clean floor. "You did all this?" He nodded. "Couldn't just sleep here and walk away. You gave us warmth. The least we could do was return it." Diana studied him, the careful way he stood, the worn shoes, the trembling in his hands he tried to hide. "You and the girl," she said softly. "You've been on your own for a while, haven't you?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Since spring." His voice was rough, not from age but from use. "My daughter, Emma's mother, and her husband, there was an accident. My wife and I took Emma in after that. Then not long after, my wife got sick, lung cancer. We sold the house trying to keep up with the treatments. She didn't make it." He paused, looking down at the small girl, who was now tracing circles on the floor with her crayon. "After that, the bills didn't stop. I lost everything else in the space of a summer. Been moving west ever since. I heard Portland had shelters that might take families, so we kept walking. Guess this is as far as we got." The silence that followed was heavy but gentle. Diana's chest ached. She thought of her mother's frail hands stirring soup, the hospital smell that clung to her hair. She understood too well what it meant to lose someone, and keep moving because stopping hurt worse. She swallowed hard. "You don't have to go," she said finally. "Not yet anyway." Walter frowned, wary. "You've done enough already." "It's not charity," Diana said, her voice firmer than she felt. "It's work. You clearly know how to clean better than I do." She forced a small smile. "I can't pay much, honestly. I can't pay at all. But if you stay, there'll be food and a warm place to sleep. That's something." Walter's lips parted, as if to refuse, but no words came. Instead he looked down, then at Emma, who was watching Diana with wide, uncertain eyes. "Would you like that, sweetheart?" Diana asked. Emma nodded eagerly. "We could help. Grandpa's really good at fixing things, and I can draw menus." That made Diana laugh, a sound that startled even her. "Then it's settled," she said. "Welcome to Harper's Kitchen. I can't promise much, but we'll figure it out." Walter bowed his head slightly, gratitude softening the deep lines of his face. "You have no idea what this means," he said. Diana did, more than he knew. For the first time in months, she felt the restaurant breathe again. The clink of dishes, the smell of coffee, the soft murmur of voices, all of it made the place feel alive, if only for a moment. Then came the knock. It was sharp, deliberate, the sound of reality returning. Through the window, Diana saw Patricia Crawford standing outside in her perfect wool coat, her expression colder than the morning air. Diana exhaled and squared her shoulders. "Stay here," she murmured to Walter and Emma, then went to open the door. Patricia stepped inside without waiting, her heels clicking across the floor. Her eyes swept the spotless room, taking in every sign of life. "Still playing house, Harper," she said coolly. "Maybe if you spent this much energy paying rent, you wouldn't be in this mess." "Good morning, Miss Crawford," Diana said evenly. Patricia ignored the greeting. 2 months behind. You have 2 weeks to make it right, or I'll put the building on the market. I've been patient, but patience doesn't pay my bills. Diana's stomach tightened. Please, she said. This restaurant has been in my family for generations. I just need time. 2 weeks, Patricia repeated. No exceptions. The door slammed behind her, leaving the sound of her heels echoing in the silence. Behind Diana, Emma's voice broke softly. Is she taking our new home? Diana turned and forced a smile that felt like breaking glass. Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Not if I can help it. I'm sorry you had to see that, Diana said. Walter sat across from her. $10,000, 2 weeks, that's difficult. Impossible, Diana corrected. Even if I'm packed every meal service between now and then, I couldn't make that much. Not with the few customers I have now. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your soup last night, it was excellent. Diana looked up, confused by the subject change. Thank you. No, I mean technically excellent. Your technique is sound. Your seasoning is balanced, but it could be extraordinary. Walter leaned forward, intensity in his weathered face. My wife Sarah was a chef, a real chef, trained at culinary school. She taught me everything about food, not just recipes, but the science behind them. How flavors work together, how to build complexity, how to make something that people remember long after they've eaten it. Walter, I appreciate the compliment, but let me help you. Walter interrupted. Let me show you what Sarah taught me. We could take your good soup and make it something people talk about, something worth coming across town for. Emma and I, we have nowhere else to be. Let us help you save this place. You saved us last night. Let us return the favor. Diana stared at him. A homeless man was offering to help save her restaurant. It was absurd, desperate, impossible. It was also the only idea anyone had offered her. Okay, she heard herself say, show me. Over the next 3 days, Harper's kitchen filled with the hum of something it hadn't felt in months, purpose. Walter moved through the kitchen with a quiet precision that spoke of years spent behind a stove. He showed Diana things she'd never learned, not even in 3 decades of cooking. How to build flavor in layers, adding one note at a time instead of everything at once. How to caramelize vegetables until they gave up their sweetness. How to use herbs like punctuation, never letting one voice drown out another. He had her taste everything. Again, teaching her to listen to food, to know when it needed brightness, when it needed rest. It was like learning a new language, one she'd somehow always spoken but never truly understood. On the second day, as the pale winter light slanted through the kitchen window, Walter reached into the pocket of his threadbare coat. He pulled out a small glass jar, its label worn smooth. Sarah's spice blend, he said softly. Smoked paprika, cumin, coriander, and a touch of cinnamon. She made it herself. I've kept it with me since she died. He turned the jar in his hands for a moment, eyes distant. Couldn't bring myself to use it, until now. He added a pinch to the soup simmering on the stove. The air changed instantly, warm, rich, alive. Diana leaned closer, inhaling deeply, and closed her eyes. Oh my God, she whispered. Walter smiled, a small wistful thing that seemed to thaw years off his face. It's still your mother's soup, he said, but now it has a story in every spoonful. They worked side by side for hours, adjusting, tasting, refining, until the kitchen smelled of autumn and memory. Emma helped too, serious and focused, her tiny hands steady as she measured spices under Walter's watchful eye. By the third night, they had created something extraordinary. Not just a soup, but a feeling, warmth you could taste. We should call it something special, Emma said, tapping her crayon against her chin. Diana glanced at Walter. Harper's Harvest Soup, she said. A mix of my mother's tradition and everything you and Sarah created. Walter's eyes shimmered. Sarah would have loved that name. She always said the best food came from combining stories, not recipes. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch in the storage room, Diana sat alone in her office, staring at the register drawer. There was barely $100 left inside. The rational part of her said save it. But when she looked at Emma's torn princess dress drying by the heater, reason lost. The next morning, she walked down to the thrift shop on Maple, and spent the last $60 she had, half of what was left to her name, on a tiny yellow coat, a knitted sweater, and a pair of mittens that didn't match. When she returned, Emma's face lit up as if the sun had followed Diana through the door. Are those for us? Diana set the paper bag on the counter. They're not new, she said gently, but they're warmer than what you've got. Walter started to shake his head. We can't. Yes you can, Diana said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. Everyone who works here gets a uniform. Those are yours. Emma twirled in her new coat, a little big, but perfect in every way. Walter tried on the sweater. The yarn stretched thin but soft, and for a moment he looked 10 years younger. Diana smiled, and for the first time since she'd met them, she didn't see pity between them. She saw family. That night, after they went to sleep, she sat alone at the counter, watching the neon sign flicker in the window. The restaurant was still quiet, the bills still unpaid, but something in her chest had shifted. For the first time in months, she felt purpose instead of fear. Maybe saving this place wasn't about money anymore. Maybe it was about people. The following morning, she woke before dawn. The thought had been growing quietly in her mind all night, a wild, impossible idea. If people wouldn't come inside, she'd bring the kitchen out to them. She cooked one enormous pot of the new soup, the last of her best ingredients, and set a folding table just outside the restaurant window. On a sheet of cardboard, she scrawled with a black marker, "Free soup, warm your heart this season." Emma stood beside her in her new yellow coat, cheeks pink from the cold, calling out with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. "Come try our harvest soup, it's free." The first passers-by hesitated. A businessman in an expensive overcoat stopped, skeptical. "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch," Diana said, "just soup, and a hope you'll remember us." He accepted a cup. After the first sip, his expression changed. "This tastes like my grandmother's kitchen," he murmured. "How did you?" But Diana only smiled. Secret recipe. Others followed, a construction worker, a postal clerk, a young mother with her toddler. Soon a small crowd had gathered, drawn not just by the smell, but by the warmth radiating from the scene itself. "This is incredible," the young mother said, cradling her child. "What's in this?" "Love," Emma said from behind the table, her eyes bright. "Miss Diana puts love in everything she makes." The woman laughed, but something softened in her face, that fragile look of someone remembering what kindness felt like. She came back that afternoon with 3 friends. They filled the little restaurant, ordering soup, sandwiches and coffee. Laughter returned to the space like it had just been waiting for permission. When they left, one of them hugged Diana. "Thank you," she said. "I haven't felt this good in months. It's not just the food, it's this place. It feels like coming home." Diana stood at the door long after they'd gone, watching the last traces of sunlight reflect off the clean windows. Inside, Walter was washing dishes while Emma hummed softly, drawing another picture on a napkin, 3 figures under a glowing sign that read Harper's Kitchen. Diana looked at them, her throat tightening. For the first time she understood what her mother had meant all those years ago. Food could fill a stomach. But love filled a room. Word began to spread through the neighborhood and then beyond. People posted photos on social media with captions like "Found the most amazing soup in the city" and "This little restaurant has something special." Food bloggers started showing up, initially skeptical but leaving as believers. By the end of the week, Harper's Kitchen had more customers than it had seen in months. People came specifically for the soup, but they stayed for the atmosphere. The surge of customers didn't erase Diana's debt, but it changed everything. For the first time in months, she had cash left in the register after paying the week's bills. When Patricia Crawford stopped by unannounced that Friday, she found the restaurant full, every table occupied, laughter spilling into the street. Diana handed her an envelope with half the overdue rent, saying quietly, "It's not everything, but it's honest." Patricia hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the line of waiting customers. For a long second, she seemed to weigh numbers in her head. 2 more months, she said finally. "Let's see if this miracle of yours holds." She turned to leave but paused at the door. Through the window she watched a group of strangers sharing soup, laughing like old friends. Something in her expression softened, the faintest crack in years of polished distance. "You might just pull this off, Harper," she murmured, almost to herself. Then she stepped out into the cold, the sound of laughter following her down the street. Walter's quiet presence as he carefully washed dishes visible through the kitchen window. Emma's infectious joy as she brought water to tables and chatted with customers about her drawings. And Diana's genuine care, the way she remembered names and asked about people's lives, made everyone feel seen. One elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, became a regular almost immediately. She had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She told Diana one afternoon, "I lost my husband 6 months ago. I've been eating frozen dinners alone every night since then, watching the walls close in. But when I come here, I don't feel so lonely anymore. It's like I have family again." Diana felt tears prick her eyes. This was what her mama had always talked about. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was connection. It was love made tangible, the thread that wove people together into community. Across the street, the lights of Dominic's bistro glowed cold and perfect behind their glass facade. Victor Dominic had built his reputation on precision, flawless service, exquisite plating, exclusivity that made people feel privileged to be there. For years he had ruled the neighborhood's dining scene, and when Harper's Kitchen began to fade, he had watched with quiet satisfaction. In his mind, there wasn't room for both warmth and wealth, only one could survive. But now, crowds lined up outside Harper's Kitchen every evening, their laughter spilling across the street into his empty dining room. His satisfaction curdled into rage. The reviews he once owned now praised Diana Harper by name. His investors whispered about heart and community, words Victor despised because they couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. One night, standing by the window of his empty restaurant, Victor watched another group cross the street. "Find out what they're serving," he said. Lisa, his manager, returned 20 minutes later with a styrofoam container. "It's called Harper's Heritage Soup," she said flatly. Victor opened it. Steam curled into the air, carrying a smell that hit him with a strange, disarming warmth. He tasted it, intending to sneer, but the flavor stopped him cold. It was layered, alive, familiar and haunting. It tasted like memory. He set the spoon down, his expression hardening. "This," he said quietly, "is a problem." "What do you want me to do?" Lisa asked, her voice carefully neutral. Victor leaned back in his chair, his mind working through possibilities. He had not built his restaurant empire, small as it was, by playing fair. "Find out everything you can about their operation. I want to know their suppliers, their recipes if possible, their weaknesses. If Harper's Kitchen is going to steal my customers, I need to know how to stop it." Over the following weeks, Victor watched and schemed. He noticed that Diana ordered her produce from Miller's Farm, a local supplier known for quality and fair prices. Victor made a phone call. Tom Miller was a good man, but he was also struggling with his own debts, equipment failures, and the general hardship of small farming. "Tom," Victor said smoothly when the farmer answered. "Victor Dominic here. I have a proposition for you. I want to offer you an exclusive contract. I'll pay you double what Harper's Kitchen pays, guaranteed orders, consistent money. All I ask is that you prioritize my orders and well, if Diana Harper's deliveries get delayed, or if the quality isn't quite up to your usual standards, I'll understand." Tom hesitated. "Victor, I've been selling to Diana's family for 20 years. Her mother was good to me when times were tough. And I'm sure Diana appreciates that loyalty," Victor said, his voice dropping to a more threatening tone. "But loyalty doesn't pay bills, Tom. Your equipment is failing, your farm is barely breaking even. I'm offering you stability. Unless you'd prefer to explain to your wife why you turned down guaranteed income for sentiment." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out. Finally, Tom said quietly, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing illegal," Victor assured him. "Just prioritize my orders. If that means Harper's Kitchen sometimes gets last pick of the produce, well, that's just business, isn't it?" Tom Miller, struggling with mounting debts and the fear of losing his family's farm, reluctantly agreed. Victor leaned back in his chair, satisfied. It wasn't personal, he told himself. Just business. The weak always gave way to the strong. He convinced himself that was the end of it, a simple advantage in a competitive market. But deep down, a quieter voice whispered that it wasn't enough. Within weeks, Diana found herself receiving inferior produce. The quality of her food suffered. The beautiful fresh vegetables that had made their soup shine were replaced with limp carrots, bruised tomatoes, and lettuce that was already turning brown. Not spoiled enough to complain about, but far from the premium quality she'd always received. Customers began to notice. The soup, while still good, lost some of its magic. Diana called Miller repeatedly, her frustration growing. "Tom, what's going on? I've never had problems with you before. The last 3 deliveries have been terrible." "I'm sorry, Diana," Tom said, and he sounded genuinely apologetic. "We're having truck problems, supplier issues. It's been a difficult season," but something in his voice didn't ring true. Diana had known Tom her whole life. She could tell when he was hiding something. "Something's wrong," Walter said one night, as they examined a crate of vegetables that looked like they'd been sitting in a warehouse for a week. His experienced hands sorted through them, salvaging what he could. "This isn't like Miller, he's always been reliable. Someone's interfering with our suppliers." "Who would do that?" Emma asked from her perch on a stool, where she was supposed to be doing homework but was instead watching the adults with worried eyes. Diana looked out the window at Dominic's bistro, its lights gleaming in the darkness, its dining room conspicuously empty. "I have an idea," she said grimly. But suspecting and proving were 2 different things. Diana couldn't afford to make accusations without evidence. All she could do was find new suppliers, which meant higher costs, less profit, and produce that wasn't quite as good, because she couldn't afford the premium sources anymore. The financial pressure that had just begun to ease came crashing back down. Then things got worse. Health inspectors showed up 3 times in 2 weeks, far more frequently than normal. They were polite but thorough, examining every corner of the restaurant with exacting detail. Each time they found minor violations, a loose tile here that could be a tripping hazard, a temperature gauge on one refrigerator that was 1 degree off the recommended range, a small crack in a wall that could harbor bacteria. Nothing serious, but enough to require immediate fixes and costly repairs. Each violation came with paperwork and deadlines, and the implicit threat that failure to comply immediately would result in closure. "This doesn't make sense," Diana told Walter as she wrote yet another check to a repair service, watching her carefully rebuilt reserves drain away. "I've been running this place for years, we've never had this many inspections. My mother ran it for 30 years before me, and never saw an inspector more than once a year." Walter's expression was grim as he studied the latest inspection report. "Someone's reporting you, Diana. Someone who knows exactly what to report to cause you maximum trouble without being obviously false. Someone who wants to see you fail." Diana felt her exhaustion turning into anger, hot and bright in her chest. She had worked so hard, had finally started to see hope, and now someone was actively trying to destroy everything she'd built. Not through fair competition, but through sabotage and manipulation. The final blow came when Diana discovered that someone had been posting negative reviews online. Detailed, convincing reviews claiming that Harper's Kitchen had made them sick. One said they'd gotten food poisoning from the soup. Another claimed to have found hair in their sandwich. A third described the restaurant as dirty and unsafe with obvious health code violations. The reviews were clearly fake, written from newly created accounts with no other activity, no profile pictures, no history of reviewing other establishments. But they damaged the restaurant's reputation nonetheless. Potential customers saw the 1-star ratings and decided to eat elsewhere. Diana tried to respond, to explain, but the reviews kept coming faster than she could address them. One evening, as Diana was closing up, feeling beaten down by the accumulated weight of sabotage, Victor Dominic himself walked through the door. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Diana made in a month. His smile was cold and calculated. The smile of a shark. "Diana Harper," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never truly struggled. "I've been meaning to stop by. Try the famous soup everyone's talking about." His tone made it clear he thought famous was a generous description. "What do you want, Victor?" Diana asked flatly, too tired for pleasantries or pretense. "Straight to business." "I respect that," he said, looking around the restaurant with thinly veiled contempt. His eyes lingered on Emma's drawings on the wall, on the mismatched chairs Diana had collected over the years, on the worn but clean floors. You're struggling again. Everyone can see it. Your supplier problems, your health code violations, your terrible online reviews. It must be exhausting. Fighting so hard just to keep this place afloat. Diana's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Get to the point. I'm willing to buy you out, Victor said, spreading his hands as though offering her a gift. A fair price for your recipes and your customer list. You can walk away with some dignity intact and enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere without so much competition, and I'll take this space off your hands, expand my operations. It's a win for everyone. This place isn't for sale, Diana said through gritted teeth, every word costing her effort to keep her voice level. Victor's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Everything's for sale, Diana. It's just a matter of price, and right now your price is dropping by the day. How much longer can you sustain these losses? How long before Patricia Crawford loses patience again? Think about it. You can end this struggle right now, take my offer, or watch everything crumble around you. He paused at the door, looking back with mock concern. Oh, and Diana, those health inspections. They're going to keep coming. And I imagine your supply problems aren't going to improve, just something to consider. He left, and Diana stood in the empty restaurant, shaking with rage and fear. That night, Walter found her sitting in the dark restaurant, tears streaming down her face, staring at the bills spread across a table. He's going to win, she whispered, her voice broken. I can't fight him. He has everything I don't have. Money, influence, and the willingness to destroy people to get what he wants. Walter sat down beside her, his weathered hand covering hers. Listen to me, he said quietly. I've lived long enough to see empires rise and fall. I've seen strong men crumble and quiet people endure. Oh, Victor has money, yes. He has influence, yes. But he doesn't have what you have. What do I have? Diana asked bitterly. Bills I can't pay. A restaurant that's falling apart. A daughter who deserves better than this. You have people who believe in you, Walter said firmly. You have a community that you've fed and cared for. You have integrity that Victor can never buy. And you have the truth. The truth always comes out, Diana. Always, we just have to hold on long enough to see it. Diana wanted to believe him, but the weight of it all felt crushing. She looked at the empty restaurant, at the walls that held so many memories of her mother, at Emma's drawings that brightened every corner. She thought about giving up, about taking Victor's offer and walking away. It would be so much easier. But then she thought about what her mother would say. About how Rose Harper had faced her own battles, her own dark moments, and had never surrendered the dream of a place where everyone was welcome. What do I do? Diana whispered. You keep cooking. Walter said simply. You keep feeding people. You keep being kind. And you let the universe handle the rest. Because kindness, real kindness, it has a power that cruelty can never match. It spreads, it multiplies, and eventually it wins. The next morning, Diana posted on social media, not a complaint, not an accusation, but a simple truth. She wrote about her mother's dream, the restaurant's history, and the struggles that had nearly broken her. She didn't name Victor, but she described the pattern. Delayed supplies, sudden health inspections, and a flood of suspicious online posts that accused Harper's Kitchen of being dirty or unsafe. I don't know if Harper's Kitchen will survive. She wrote, but I know we've tried to do right by our community. We've fed people when they were hungry, whether they could pay or not. We've treated every customer like family. And if this is the end, I want you all to know it's been an honor to serve you. Thank you for 30 years of memories. She posted it and went back to work, expecting nothing. But something extraordinary happened. The post went viral, not just locally but nationwide. People shared it, commented, and expressed outrage at what was happening. A food blogger, with over 1 million followers, published a detailed piece about Harper's Kitchen, noting the suspicious timing of its troubles and the signs of deliberate sabotage. The article mentioned Victor's name and his competing restaurant. Soon after, the local news picked up the story. Reporter Sarah Reed arrived with a camera crew. "Tell me everything," she said. And Diana, with Walter at her side, and Emma peeking from the kitchen, told the truth about the supplier issues, the endless inspections, and the smear campaign online. She recounted Victor's visit, his threats, his offer to buy her out. "Do you have proof?" Sarah asked. "No," Diana admitted. "But I have records, dates, invoices, inspection reports, and I have a community that knows who I am and what this place stands for." That night, the story aired. It was powerful and raw, painting a clear picture of a small restaurant being slowly crushed by greed and manipulation. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, 35,000 by morning, 120,000 by week's end. But it wasn't just money, it was people. Contractors volunteered to repair the place. Suppliers donated new kitchen equipment. Mrs. Patterson organized cleanup shifts with military precision. Big Jim and his crew refused to take payment. "You fed us when we were hungry," he said gruffly, carrying lumber inside. "Now it's our turn." Walter stood in the middle of it all, tears in his eyes. "Do you see?" he whispered to Diana. "This is what you built, not walls, not profits." Even Patricia Crawford was moved. She approached Diana, amid the noise of hammers and laughter. "I'm giving you 3 months rent-free," she said awkwardly. "Call it my contribution. I've been a landlord for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this." She paused, then added with a faint smile, "Victor Dominic's offer is off the table." Diana's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Patricia patted her shoulder stiffly. "Just don't make me regret it," she said, but she stayed until Diana's tears stopped. Meanwhile, Sarah Reed kept digging. Weeks later, she uncovered the truth. A whistleblower from Dominic's Bistro came forward with emails, payments, and chat logs proving Victor had hired a marketing firm to fabricate complaints and fake reviews under anonymous accounts. The campaign had been deliberate, and now, undeniable. Sarah contacted the city's business fraud division. They launched an official investigation. The evidence was damning in its clarity. The city's investigation traced every fake complaint and review back to one source, a marketing firm secretly hired by Dominic's Bistro. Emails, payment receipts, and text messages told the whole story. The campaign had been designed to cripple Harper's Kitchen's reputation while keeping Victor's name hidden. When detectives questioned the firm's manager, he confessed that Victor had given direct instructions. "Make them look dirty. Make them look dishonest. I don't care how." The health inspections proved more complicated to trace, but eventually investigators found a pattern. An anonymous caller had been reporting Harper's Kitchen repeatedly, always with specific details about where to look. The inspections themselves were legitimate, but the frequency and targeting were suspicious. While they couldn't prove Victor made the calls, the timing correlated perfectly with his other sabotage efforts. 2 days later, Victor was served with a warrant for fraud, defamation, and interference with business operations. The arrest happened at lunchtime, in full view of his remaining customers. Cameras captured the moment he was led out of Dominic's Bistro, his once pristine chef's coat wrinkled, his face pale with fury and disbelief. The trial drew national attention, not because of violence, but because of what it revealed. Behind Victor's polished public image was a history of quiet destruction, secret payoffs to inspectors, bribes to reviewers, and smear campaigns against any restaurant that threatened his profits. One by one, former employees testified. One of them, a young marketing assistant, tearfully told the court, "He said kindness was weakness. He told us to bury Harper's Kitchen before it became a movement." When Diana took the stand, she wore her mother's black dress, the same one her mother had worn the day Harper's Kitchen first opened 50 years earlier. It still smelled faintly of cinnamon and thyme. Walter sat quietly behind her, his hands folded, his presence solid as stone. Emma, too small for the courtroom benches, sat between community members, a sketchbook in her lap and her legs swinging nervously. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the aisles, former small business owners whispered in the back rows. And at the defense table sat Victor Dominic, the man who had once owned the street, the headlines, the arrogance. Now his expensive suit hung loose on him. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and the proud, calculating eyes that once scanned every room for weakness were glassy and unfocused. When he looked up and saw Diana on the witness stand, something flickered in his expression, not hatred, not even defiance, but a hollow recognition. The person he'd tried to destroy was standing because of what he'd broken. Diana's voice trembled only once as she spoke. "My mother built Harper's Kitchen to prove that goodness and business could coexist," she began. "She believed food could do more than feed people, it could connect them. When she died, I promised to keep that alive." She looked directly at Victor. "We welcomed anyone who walked through our doors, not because it was profitable, but because it was right." Mr. Dominic couldn't understand that. He thought success meant crushing others. But in trying to destroy us, he showed the world what greed really looks like, and what love can overcome. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of pens scratching on paper. Victor's lawyer tried to object, but the judge's gavel came down once, sharp and final. "Overruled. Let her finish." When Diana stepped down, she passed by Victor's table. He tried to meet her eyes, but she didn't look at him. She only placed her hand briefly over Emma's shoulder as she walked by. The little girl turned in her seat, and looked at Victor with open curiosity, not fear, the same way she'd once looked at stray cats by the dumpster behind the diner. It made him look away. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Victor Dominic, guilty on all counts." A quiet gasp rippled through the room. The judge's verdict came swiftly: 5 years for corporate fraud and defamation, restitution for every small business he'd harmed, and a lifetime ban from owning or managing a restaurant. His reputation, once his greatest armor, shattered in a single sentence. Victor sat motionless. He didn't shout, didn't argue. Only his jaw tightened, his eyes dropped to his cuffed hands. For the first time he looked small, the kind of small that comes from realizing too late that you've built your life on the wrong foundation. As the bailiff moved to escort him out, he hesitated, turning once toward Diana and her family. His voice was barely audible. "You were right about one thing, love, it lasts longer than winning." Then he was gone. Within weeks, Dominic's bistro closed its doors. The once glistening windows were covered with brown paper, the gold lettering scraped away, a crooked for lease sign dangled in the wind. People passed by without stopping. The place smelled of dust and endings. But across the street, Harper's Kitchen thrived like never before. The renovation began almost immediately, not to erase the past, but to honor it. The community insisted on preserving one wall exactly as it was: old plaster, water-stained, the faint outline of where the eviction notice had once hung. That wall became the kindness wall. On it, they pinned photographs and mementos: Diana's mother serving soup to a line of smiling neighbors, Emma's first crayon drawing of the 3 of them, a picture of Walter teaching new volunteers to chop onions, and dozens of Polaroids showing the people who had rebuilt the place together. Beneath it, a brass plaque gleamed softly: built by family, tested by greed, reborn by love. The new kitchen shone with stainless steel and sunlight. A supplier who had watched the trial had donated all the equipment, saying simply, "You reminded us what integrity tastes like." Above the prep station hung Diana's mother's recipe cards, the edges browned and fragile, the ink faded but legible. Beside them, in a small glass case, was Walter's wooden spoon. Emma had written a little label beneath it in marker: "The Survivor." When spring came, the air outside smelled of lilacs and new beginnings. The reopening crowd stretched around the block, people from every part of the city, holding flowers, handmade signs, even jars of their own soup in tribute. Mrs. Patterson, radiant in her Sunday hat, stood at the front with scissors in hand. "May Harper's Kitchen," she said, voice shaking, "never close its doors to kindness again." The ribbon fluttered to the ground, and the cheer that followed carried down the entire street. Inside,
Laughter filled the air once more. Big Jim and his construction crew took the first table, their plaque proudly reading, "The Rebuilders." Emma, in a bright blue dress, handed out menus she had illustrated herself, each page lined with tiny hearts and steaming bowls. Walter stood at the stove beside Diana, apron tied neatly, his hands steady. "Ready, partner?" she asked. Walter smiled. "Let's feed our people." The first order was, of course, Harper's heritage soup. Diana ladled it carefully into a bowl. Walter sprinkled a touch of sumac and za'atar on top, his late wife's secret, and handed it to Sarah Reed, the reporter whose story had once saved them. Sarah took one spoonful, eyes closing as tears welled up. "It tastes," she whispered, "like hope." That day, Harper's Kitchen served more than 300 people. The line never ended, but no one complained. Strangers held doors for each other. Children shared tables with retirees. People came hungry for food and left full of something deeper, connection. As night settled, the last candle burned low. Diana turned off the stove and joined Walter and Emma near the counter. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left. Outside, the neon sign glowed steady in the dark. Harper's Kitchen. Emma climbed onto a stool, her sketchbook open. She showed them her latest drawing, the three of them standing in front of the diner, surrounded by smiling faces of all colors and ages. At the bottom, she'd written in big careful letters, "Our family restaurant, where everyone belongs." Diana's throat tightened. She pulled Emma close, kissing the top of her head. "You're right, sweetheart," she whispered. "Everyone belongs." Walter watched them, a faint smile playing across his tired face. He reached out and laid a hand on Diana's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. "You kept her promise, and made it bigger." Diana nodded, tears glinting under the warm light. Outside, the street was quiet, the air crisp with the scent of soup drifting from the vent above the door. Across the road, Dominic's bistro stood dark and empty, but inside Harper's Kitchen, everything glowed with life. For the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were home.
6 months after the grand reopening, Harper's Kitchen was alive again. That evening, the little diner glowed with warm candlelight, every table filled with laughter, the air thick with the scent of soup, bread and belonging. Diana stood behind the counter, her hands resting on the old wood her mother once polished, watching her customers share food and stories like family around a dinner table. It had been 50 years since her mother first opened these doors. Diana had spent half her life trying to keep them from closing. Now for the first time she felt peace. Success didn't look like wealth or recognition. It felt like quiet purpose, like a single act of kindness that had multiplied until it filled a room. After closing, the last candles flickered low. Diana, Walter and Emma sat in their usual booth, the same one where they'd eaten their first meal together 3 years earlier. The dishes were done, the street outside was silent, and the air smelled faintly of herbs and sugar. Walter cupped his hands around a mug of tea. His hair was thinner now, but his eyes were still steady and kind. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "We've built something here, haven't we? Not just food, family." Diana smiled. "We have." He nodded. "What if we could teach others to build the same thing? To find what we found here?" "You mean another Harper's Kitchen?" she asked. "Not exactly." His voice was thoughtful. "Teach people how to cook, but also how to care. Show them that food isn't just about recipes, it's about rebuilding a life." Emma, now 9 and full of light, grinned. "Like a kindness school, Miss Diana teaches the soup part, Grandpa teaches the love part." Diana's laughter filled the empty diner. "A kindness school," she said, shaking her head fondly. "Maybe that's exactly what this world needs." She glanced at the two of them, the man she'd once found shivering outside her door, the little girl who had changed her life. Without thinking, she reached across the table and took both their hands. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been meaning to make this official." Walter frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "Your family, you've been family since the night you walked in here, but I'd like it to be official. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The papers are ready." Emma's eyes widened. "Papers, for adoption," Diana said gently. "If you'd both let me, I'd like to be your family, for real." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Walter covered her hand with his voice trembled. "Diana, after everything, are you sure?" She nodded. "Family isn't about blood, it's about who stays when everyone else walks away." "You both stayed." Walter's eyes filled. Emma let out a small sob and climbed into Diana's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck. "I always wanted a mom," she whispered. Diana held her close, her own tears spilling freely. "And I always wanted a daughter." That night, Harper's Kitchen became more than a restaurant, it became a home. 3 years later, Harper's Kitchen was thriving, not just as a restaurant, but as a small movement. The Heritage Kitchen Initiative had grown into a citywide program, teaching people how to rebuild their lives through food. The afternoon hours that had once been quiet now buzzed with activity. Students learned knife skills and recipe development, yes, but also budgeting, customer service, conflict resolution, and the subtle art of making people feel welcomed. Classes ran 5 days a week, graduation ceremonies happened every quarter, and the walls were now covered with photographs of program alumni standing proudly in front of their own establishments. Diana had worried in the beginning that adding the program would dilute what made Harper's Kitchen special. Instead, it had amplified it. The restaurant had become a training ground, where students learned by doing, serving real customers who understood they were part of something larger than a simple meal. The customers were patient with slower service, generous with encouragement, invested in each student's success. It turned every meal into a teaching moment, and every mistake into an opportunity for growth. Walter had stepped into the role of lead instructor with a passion that made him seem younger, more vital. He taught with stories and demonstrations, with patience and occasional tough love. He had a gift for seeing potential in people who had forgotten they possessed any. Diana handled the administrative work and taught business skills, but she knew the heart of the program was Walter's ability to convince people that they mattered, that their contributions had value, that they could create beauty even after hardship. Emma, now 10, had become an unofficial teaching assistant. She moved through the kitchen with surprising authority for someone so young, demonstrating techniques, encouraging nervous students and somehow making everyone feel capable. The students adored her, and Diana often caught herself watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and wonder. This was what intergenerational learning looked like. This was legacy in action. That morning started like any other. Diana was in her office reviewing applications for the next cohort when the program coordinator appeared in the doorway, her expression careful and uncertain. "Diana," she said quietly, "you might want to come down. There's someone asking about volunteer work. Says he was sent by the Community Reintegration Board." Something in her tone made Diana's stomach tighten. The Community Reintegration Board worked with people transitioning out of incarceration. They'd sent several students to the program over the years, and all of them had been grateful for the opportunity, humble about their pasts, and committed to moving forward. But the coordinator's careful tone suggested this was different. Diana stood, smoothing her apron. "Did they give a name?" The coordinator hesitated. "Yes, but I think you should just come see." Diana followed her down the stairs, through the kitchen where the lunch prep was underway, past the dining room where tables were being set for the afternoon service. The coordinator led her to the front entrance, then stepped back slightly, as though giving Diana space for whatever was about to happen. When Diana stepped out onto the front steps, she froze. Standing on the sidewalk below, thinner than she remembered, grayer, diminished in a way that went beyond physical appearance, was Victor Dominic. He wore a plain gray jacket with a Department of Corrections badge clipped to the pocket. His hands, she noticed, were empty, no briefcase, no phone, none of the accessories of power he'd always carried. He stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, as though he'd learned to make himself smaller. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Diana felt her heart hammering, her mind flooding with memories, the threats, the sabotage, the courtroom, the satisfaction she'd felt when he'd been led away in handcuffs. And now this him standing on her doorstep, looking nothing like the man who had tried to destroy her. He didn't try to smile, he just took off his cap, holding it in both hands, and met her eyes with effort. "Miss Harper," he said, and his voice was different too, quieter, rougher, stripped of the smooth confidence she remembered. "I know I'm the last person you ever wanted to see. I'm part of a work release program. They sent me here to log community service hours. I told them I'd only go if you agreed. His voice trembled slightly, rough from disuse or emotion or both. "I don't expect forgiveness. I'd like to help, quietly, however you'll let me. If you can't, I understand. I'll go somewhere else, but I needed to ask, needed to give you the choice I never gave you." Diana felt Walter's presence behind her before she heard him. He'd followed her out, understanding without being told that she might need support. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not guiding, just present. She studied Victor, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated performance she knew he was capable of. But what she saw was exhaustion, genuine humility, the kind of brokenness that came from sitting with your failures for 3 years with nothing to distract you from what you'd done. The man who had once tried to destroy her business now stood before her, reduced and hollowed out, not by punishment alone, but by time, by consequence, by whatever internal reckoning happened when a person's entire identity was stripped away and they had to figure out who they were underneath. Part of her wanted to refuse, to tell him to leave and never come back, to protect herself and her space from the person who had caused so much pain. It would be justified, understandable, probably even wise, but another part of her, the part that sounded like her mother, like Walter, like the philosophy they'd built this entire program around, whispered something different. What was the point of teaching redemption if you didn't believe in it yourself? What was the point of a program called Heritage Kitchen, if you hoarded the heritage instead of sharing it? What was the point of community if it only included people who'd never hurt you? The silence stretched. She could feel people watching from the windows, students, staff, customers who recognized the man standing on the sidewalk. She knew whatever happened next would become part of the restaurant's story, part of the program's identity. This was a defining moment, whether she wanted it to be or not. Finally she nodded toward the back door. Her voice when it came was steady but not warm, not forgiving, but not cruel either. Simply factual. "We always need hands in the dish pit." Victor's eyes closed briefly, his relief visible. He bowed his head. "Thank you." "Rules," Diana said, stopping him before he could move. "You're here to work, not to talk about the past. Not to explain or apologize or seek forgiveness. Just work. If any student feels uncomfortable with your presence, you leave. If I feel you're disrupting the program in any way, you leave. If you miss a single day without good cause, you don't come back. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Understood." "And Victor?" She waited until he met her eyes again. "This isn't for you, this is for everyone watching to see what we do. This is for every student who needs to believe that change is possible. You're here to serve that, not yourself." "Clear, clear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Diana turned and walked back inside without waiting to see if he followed. Her hands were shaking, her heart still pounding. Walter squeezed her shoulder gently before releasing her. "That was brave," he said softly. "That was terrifying," she corrected. "Both can be true," he said, with a small smile. And just like that, the man who had once ruled the city's dining scene, who had tried to crush a small family restaurant to feed his ego, picked up a rag, stepped into the kitchen and began to scrub. The first few weeks were tense, students whispered. Some recognized him from the news coverage years ago and struggled with working alongside someone who represented everything the program stood against. Diana held extra meetings, created space for people to voice their discomfort, made it clear that anyone who wanted to leave the program because of his presence would receive full support and references. But something unexpected happened. Slowly, reluctantly, people began to see Victor not as the villain from their newspaper memories, but as the quiet man who arrived early and stayed late, who scrubbed pots without complaint, who spoke only when spoken to and never about himself. One afternoon, a young student named Marcus, recently released after serving time for theft, found himself struggling with a stubborn burnt pan. Victor, who had been working silently nearby, stepped over. "Try baking soda and vinegar," he said quietly. "Let it sit for 10 minutes. Makes the work easier." Marcus looked at him suspiciously. "How do you know?" "I've scrubbed a lot of pans in the last 3 years, Victor said simply and moved back to his own work. The next day Marcus left a note on the dish station. "Thanks for the tip, it worked." Small interactions like that began to accumulate.
Victor teaching a student how to properly sharpen knives. Victor showing someone the efficient way to organize a prep station. Victor staying late to help break down a complicated catering order. He never offered advice unless asked. Never drew attention to his skills. Never reminded anyone that he'd once been a chef, that he'd once owned restaurants, that he'd once been someone. Walter watched it all with his characteristic patience, waiting to see if the change was real or performed. One evening, he approached Victor in the dish pit. "You know how to cook," Walter said. It wasn't a question, Victor continued scrubbing. "I'm here to wash dishes, you're here to serve," Walter corrected gently. "Sometimes serving means using all your gifts, not hiding them. I don't think anyone wants me teaching them anything," Victor said quietly. "Let me tell you what I see," Walter said, leaning against the counter. "I see someone who shows up, who works hard, who helps when asked, who respects boundaries, that's worth something. But I also see someone who's punishing himself instead of helping others. The past doesn't go away because you hide from it, it goes away when you transform it into something useful." Victor finally looked up, his hands still in the soapy water. "I hurt people, I hurt Diana. How do I transform that? By teaching people what you learned from being broken." Walter said simply, "You know what greed looks like from the inside. You know what it costs, you know what matters and what doesn't. That's valuable knowledge. The question is whether you're brave enough to share it." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I am." "Then keep washing dishes until you figure it out," Walter said, not unkindly, "but don't waste your damage. Pain that teaches is pain transformed." Over the next year, the program grew beyond anything they'd imagined. Graduates opened cafes and food trucks across the city, each carrying the same quiet message of dignity and belonging. A former program student opened a bakery that hired people coming out of homelessness. Another started a catering company that specifically employed people with criminal records. The ripples kept spreading, each business becoming its own small proof that second chances could work. Victor stayed. After 6 months he began teaching knife skills, just one class, once a week, always with Diana's explicit permission. He taught with a gentleness that surprised everyone, praising effort over perfection, emphasizing safety over speed. He never talked about his own restaurant, his own successes. He just taught technique, and listened more than he spoke. Students responded to him cautiously, at first, then with growing trust. They saw someone who had fallen further than most of them, and was climbing back without excuses or shortcuts. They saw someone who showed up every day, apron tied, sleeves rolled, eyes softer than they used to be. Sometimes customers recognized him. Diana watched it happen from behind the counter. The double take, the whisper to a companion, the calculation of whether to stay or leave. Some walked out. Diana never tried to stop them, never explained. Their discomfort was valid. Their choice was valid. But most stayed, because the man washing dishes in the back, the man patiently teaching a nervous student how to hold a knife properly, was clearly not the same person who had made headlines 3 years ago. Change, when it was real, was visible, not dramatic or flashy, but consistent. Humble. Patient with its own incompleteness. Emma, growing into her preteen confidence, was perhaps the most skeptical. She remembered the stress of those years, even if she'd been too young to understand all of it. She remembered her mother crying, remembered the fear, remembered the relief when Victor had been taken away. "Why is he here?" she asked Diana one afternoon, watching Victor teach a student how to dice an onion without crying. "Because we teach second chances," Diana said simply. "Does he deserve one?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the sharp clarity of youth. Diana was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know. I'm not sure that's my question to answer, but I know what we deserve to be the kind of place that means what it says. We can't teach redemption and then refuse to allow it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Do you forgive him?" Emma asked. "No," Diana said honestly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever, but forgiveness and opportunity are different things. He's earned the opportunity to try. That's all anyone gets." Emma considered this, her young face serious, then she went back to her homework. the conversation filed away in whatever internal system children use to make sense of complex adult choices. At the anniversary dinner that spring, Harper's kitchen was full again, laughter, warmth, the smell of soup and bread. The evening had been planned for weeks, a celebration of the program's success. Graduates had traveled from across the city to attend. The mood was joyful, proud, a little bit awed at what had been built. Emma, now 12 and beaming with the confidence of someone who'd grown up surrounded by people who believed in her, stood on a small stage they'd erected near the kindness wall. She wore a blue dress her mother had helped her pick out, and she held a note card in slightly trembling hands. The room gradually quieted, conversations fading as people turned their attention to the girl who had become the restaurant's unofficial mascot and future. "My grandma built this place," Emma said, her voice bright and sure, carrying the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed but also believed what she was saying. "My mom saved it, but the reason it's still here is because people kept forgiving each other, because kindness doesn't end, it multiplies." She paused, looking around the room at faces she'd known her whole life, and faces that were newer but no less important. "Someone once tried to destroy this restaurant. Tried to hurt my mom and take away what my grandma built. I was little, but I remember being scared. I remember thinking bad people win." The room was completely silent now. Diana felt her chest tighten, unsure where Emma was going with this. "But bad people don't win," Emma continued, her voice steady. "They just teach us what kindness really means. It's easy to be kind to people who are already kind. It's easy to help people who never hurt you. But real kindness, the kind that changes things, is harder. It's forgiving when you don't want to. It's helping people who don't deserve it. It's believing people can change even when they've given you every reason not to believe." She looked directly at the dish pit, where Victor stood in his gray jacket, apron over his work release uniform, hands clasped in front of him. "That's why this place is special. Not because we never make mistakes, because we believe people are more than their worst mistakes, including ourselves." From his position in the back, partially hidden by the kitchen's half wall, Victor looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused from years of work, first in professional kitchens where he'd used them to build his empire, then in prison kitchens where he'd used them to survive, and now here, where he used them to serve. His face crumpled slightly, tears sliding down his cheeks that he didn't bother to hide. He made no sound, but his shoulders shook with the force of emotion he'd been holding back for 3 years. Diana caught his eye across the crowded room. For a moment they just looked at each other, two people who had been enemies, then strangers, now something more complicated. Neither friends nor fully healed, but connected by the work of transformation. She nodded once, not approval, not pity, just understanding. Just acknowledgement that they were both here, both trying, both part of something larger than their individual pain. It wasn't redemption. Diana wasn't sure she believed in complete redemption, in debts fully paid and slates wiped clean. It wasn't forgiveness either, not the full forget what happened kind. She still carried the scars of what he'd done. She probably always would, but it was something. Something quieter and maybe more honest. It was the recognition that people could change without erasing what they'd been. That community could hold both truth and grace. That justice and mercy weren't opposites, but partners in the complicated work of living together. It was something that finally felt like peace. The restaurant erupted in applause for Emma's speech. Walter had tears in his eyes as he hugged his granddaughter. Diana stood behind the counter where she'd stood for so many years, where her mother had stood before her, and felt the weight of legacy settling differently now. Not as burden but as gift. Not as something to preserve unchanged, but as something to keep transforming. Harper's Kitchen had started as Rose Harper's dream of feeding people with dignity. It had survived because Diana refused to let that dream die. But it was thriving because it had become something bigger, a place that believed in the possibility of change. A place that practiced what it preached about second chances. A place where the distance between who you were and who you could become was bridged one meal, one lesson, one act of grace at a time. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Victor approached Diana hesitantly. He'd removed his apron, ready to leave as he always did, quietly and without fanfare. Miss Harper, he said softly. Thank you, for tonight, for all of it. I know, his voice caught. I know I can never make it right, but thank you for letting me try. Diana looked at him, really looked. The gray hair, the lines around his eyes, the humility that had replaced his former arrogance. Show up tomorrow, she said simply. That's all, just keep showing up. I will, he said. Then hesitating, your daughter, what she said, she means it. Diana said, we all do, you're part of this now. Not because you've earned it, because that's what this place does, it includes people, even when it's hard. Victor nodded, unable to speak. He put his cap back on and walked out into the spring evening, his steps steadier than when he'd arrived. Diana watched him go, then turned to find Walter and Emma waiting for her. Her family, not by blood in Walter's case, but by choice, by showing up, by the daily practice of care. Ready to go home? Walter asked. Yes, Diana said, taking Emma's hand. Let's go home. They locked up together, the three of them moving through the familiar routine of closing, turning off lights, checking the locks, taking one last look at the kindness wall, at the photographs and notes that told the story of 50 years of feeding people, of community built one meal at a time. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, Diana felt her mother's presence like a gentle hand on her shoulder. Not approval or disapproval, just presence. Just the reminder that she'd built something real, something lasting, something that would continue long after all of them were gone. Harper's Kitchen wasn't just a restaurant, it was a testament to the stubborn belief that goodness could endure. That community could triumph over cruelty, that people could change if given space and support and the chance to serve something larger than themselves. That one person's dream of feeding people with dignity could ripple outward and transform lives in ways impossible to predict or measure. And as Diana walked home between the two people she loved most, she realized that this ordinary evening after an extraordinary day, this quiet contentment, this sense of having created something meaningful, this was what success actually looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the elimination of pain, but the transformation of it into something useful. They had built something beautiful. Something true, something worth protecting, and sharing and passing down, and tomorrow they would show up and do it all again. Because that was what Harper's Kitchen did. It showed up, it fed people, it created space for dignity and belonging and second chances. One meal at a time, one person at a time, one day at a time, until dignity became habit, until belonging became culture, until second chances became the ordinary miracle that held communities together. That was the heritage, that was the legacy, that was the work that never ended, because it mattered too much to ever be finished. And Diana Harper, standing between her daughter and her chosen family, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, understood that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Home.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.